G'day guys, welcome back. You're with MiracleMAX. Today we're looking at something just a little bit different. We're looking at testing of a homemade smoke machine out of a paint tin. Today with stringent emission laws, we're seeing a lot of test procedures that need to be done at a very minute level, including vacuum leaks and testing of evap systems. And to carry out that testing, we're finding that we're needing some sort of smoke machine that can provide smoke through a system so we can visibly see a vacuum leak. Today I've got the ideal vehicle in. It's a Mitsubishi Triton with loads of kilometres on the clock. In fact, I believe I'm going to do a test on the inlet side of things as well as the exhaust, and I'm going to use my smoke machine to do that, even though, hey, it's just a paint tin. It cost me around about 15 bucks to make, but it works a treat. Now keep in mind that this little smoke machine that I've designed and made is not to compete with your $1,000 Smoke Pro machines or whatever they are that have, you know, bells, whistles, LEDs, buttons, circuitry inside, etc. Complete with flow gauges, which are awesome. This fella here is just a basic smoke machine, but it works. That's the important thing. This is one of my regular customers with the Mitsubishi Triton. It has a few little issues with it, and considering how many Ks are on the clock, it's done pretty damn well. The customer likes the vehicle and doesn't want to get rid of it, but of course every vehicle needs maintenance, and this thing with so many kilometres on the clock really needs a little bit of attention right now. I've previously had the inlet manifold off this vehicle because it had a leak at the inlet manifold, and while it was off I had it ultrasonically cleaned to get rid of a lot of the carbon that typically builds up on these common rail diesel engines. This time it's got a bit of a squeal, mate, and it's making a horrific noise that he's concerned about. Previous to that, the turbo had been replaced due to the fact that it was totally worn out. All the bearings were knackered in the thing. But now it's got this squealing noise and he really doesn't like the sound of it. Let's see if we can reproduce that sound and isolate where it's coming from using the homemade smoke machine. Hey, look, it's done pretty well. 372,234. That's pretty good in anyone's books. This guy uses it every single day. Travels probably, let's say, probably a couple of 100 Ks a day. So it's not surprising that it has a few little issues here and there. This noise happens under acceleration, particularly a higher gear with your foot flat knackered to the floor. So we'll check it out. I'm now in second gear, fairly low RPM, and I'll just go flat to the floor. You hear that sound? And before you say, no, it's not the turbo spooling up. So the owner of this vehicle took it to another mechanic because he was in Mittagong, which is about an hour away. He was concerned about this noise, just wanted it checked out while he was at work. And the guy said, oh, your turbo's knackered, mate. And the guy goes, no, I don't think so. And I'd previously replaced it about 1,500 Ks ago, so it wasn't that. And the owner of the vehicle said, I think it's coming over this side. It was over the inlet side that he was referring to, not to where the exhaust, where the turbo was. And when he brought it back to me, we isolated where it was coming from. But I'd just like to show you where it is using the smoke machine. See if we can isolate that and also get rid of that noise. As I mentioned before, the mechanic that previously looked at it suggested that the turbo was faulty. And the noise was coming from that side. But I've pulled off the engine cover, as you can see, the plastic cover that goes over the top of the rocker cover, and you can clearly see all the soot, which is obviously exhaust, on this side, which is the inlet side. That's where I'll be focusing my search, on this side of the engine, and using my smoke machine to find that. First of all, I will check the inlet side of things and see if I can find any smoke coming out on the inlet side of things, so a vacuum leak somewhere. Then I'll have a look at the exhaust side of things, which isn't quite as common using a smoke machine, particularly in the way that I'm just about to use it. I'm not going to go into the process of how I made this smoke machine for now. Might do that in a later video, but just for now I want to show you how the thing works. So basically, by hooking it up to power from the battery, it has a resisted wire that runs through here with baby oil in there as well, and by adding power to it, that resisted wire gets hot, and in time that will, well, look at that, straight away already you can see smoke coming out there. So that's what we're actually after, isn't it? A bit of smoke there, and if I just put some pressure in there, we'll actually force more to come out, and once that heats up more and more, we'll get more and more pressure to come through, of course, or more smoke I should say. Just be aware, you don't want to put too much pressure in these things. Don't want to blow the lid off, but I've had quite a bit of pressure in there before with no problems whatsoever. So what I've done is I've pulled my MAP sensor hose off. Yeah, there's plenty of smoke now, thanks Max. Okay, so I pulled off my MAP sensor hose here into the inlet manifold. I've used just a shopping bag and pulled off my intake ducting from my intercooler and just use that as a trap so it doesn't go back through the intercooler. And now if I just connect that to that, I should have smoke going into my inlet system, and if I put a little bit of pressure in there, we should be able to find a leak wherever that's coming from, of course, and that should make the job a lot easier. So let's do a bit of a search and rescue, see if we can find where this vacuum leak is. So keep in mind I haven't got any pressure on there whatsoever at the moment. Just chuck a light up there so we can see what we're looking for. I have done this before, so I know where the leak's coming from, but just for your benefit I will try and reenact the crime. Okay, I can see smoke coming out now. It's pouring out, and if we have a look there, which is what I found last time, look at that, heaps of smoke coming out, guys, from a homemade smoke machine. That's actually coming out the EGR valve, so we know that that is the issue there. I have another EGR valve to put on, so I'll better disconnect that first. But yeah, you can see it pouring out of the EGR valve. So the EGR valve will be replaced. Okay, next we need to look on the exhaust side of things. And to do that, I'm actually going to pull off the EGR valve to access the exhaust system. I have worked on this EGR system previously when it came up with some fault codes on the dash, with the money light being on. I'll put the link at the end of the video for that. But this is where the vacuum leak was coming out, or the smoke was coming out. Obviously the diaphragm in between here and here has failed, and I do recall at the time that I was sort of questioning whether the EGR valve had some wear in it or not, but now we've got a definitive answer. We've definitely got a knackered EGR. So I'm going to replace these gaskets here and here, of course, and make sure that everything is honky-dory when I put it back together. So now that I've got the EGR valve out the road into the heat exchanger, you can use the same method, just use the smoke machine, shove the old pipe in there, and leave it in there, pressurise it, and hopefully we should be able to see an exhaust leak somewhere up this side of things. And as I said before, the engine is covered with soot up the front side over the inlet side, so we'll check for that. Of course I can pressurise the system and see if that makes a difference too. So I've got the smoke going up the old kazoo, and hopefully just with a little bit of pressure, I can't actually see what I'm looking at here, twist it up like a contortionist. But let's see if we can get some pressure happening and drive it through. So hopefully that's what we're looking for. Put a bit more pressure, there we go, look at that, hey? How sweet is that? The old paint tin stretching out with a bit of pressure, but it's holding okay. Look at that. Beautiful. Now I can see it. Look at that, it's just pouring out that gasket there. It's where it's connected to the head. It goes off to the heat exchanger, EGR heat exchanger. Beautiful, look at it pour out there. Beautiful, excellent. So that's once again definitive. We have an exhaust gasket leak, the EGR side of things. So the whole EGR system has been a bit of a problem. We have the EGR valve itself, which is leaking internally, a vacuum leak. Now this customer has complained about some strange issues when cold first thing in the morning, a bit of hunting and surging until it warms up a bit, and this is fairly typical for an EGR valve on this particular model apparently. So let's replace that dodgy gasket there, and every gasket along the way to make sure that we've got everything sealed up tight. Well, we definitely got some evidence here. Suss this out. Look at the bolt. Seriously, it's loose as all hell. No wonder the poor thing was squealing its guts out. So I'm hoping that it's just a loose bolt, not a broken bolt, but it feels like it's threaded okay. So, seriously, the joys. But anyway, the important thing is that we're able to diagnose it correctly. It's all about diagnosis, not throwing parts at it. Like the other guy would have replaced a damn turbo, for crying out loud, that had been replaced, what, 1500 k's ago? And here we have a loose bolt on this side. Interesting. No use letting go with the parts cannon, throwing it at it, and expecting everything to be replaced. That's just not the answer. Diagnose it, guys. Figure it out. What, $15 smoke machine? Wasn't that hard, was it? So now that I've pulled that pipe off, it becomes kind of obvious that there was a leak. See all the soot build up around here. The gasket itself, pretty dodgy as. I was concerned about whether there was a leakage around here, whether there was a crack in the pipe itself, but it appears to be okay. And of course you can see the soot build up around the bolt hole. That's where it was leaking out. And of course when you see over this side the amount of soot that's spewed out all over the place, that's clearly the obvious fault. So I've cleaned it up with ye old wire brush, the bench grinder buff. It's interesting because this one over here is an aluminium housing that's been soldered on or welded onto a steel pipe. You come over here, this one here is steel, but have a look at the marks that have been cut into this poor thing, hey? It's clear that it's been going for a while. It's going to need a reasonable amount of Celastic just to take that up. I will check for flatness as well. But obviously this is just where the exhaust has chuff, 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 chuff blown away, and it's actually worn away part of the metal. It's created a bit of a gouge ring type thing, but it won't be an issue, it's not a problem. But yeah, it's just interesting. The aluminium side of things, which was nice and tight, has sealed up nicely, and the steel thing, or the steel flange I guess you could say, which you'd expect to be nice and tight, was loose as, and it's actually worn away. Just the exhaust gases have worn away a section of that. But I will check with a straight edge across here and here and make sure that it's not warped in any way, but I think it'll be okay. I'm glad I decided to look for straightness for these flanges. If we have a look at the aluminium one, it could use some improvement, a bit of a lick and a promise. Out with the old file, a bit of a heave-ho. But if we go across to that steel one, that's the one with the loose bolts. Check it out, bent like a damn Barney banana. Look at that, look at the light coming through, hey? So I'm going to have to hit it with the file pretty severely, tidy it up. But yeah, obviously heat and the looseness of the bolts has encouraged that to warp given time. But yeah, I'm glad I decided to check that so I can do something about it before I put it back on. Otherwise it would have come back, wouldn't it? You can clearly see how badly warped it is. I've just run over it a few times with the file in a crosshatch pattern, which means going this way and then across that way. And yeah, you can see the centre's not even touched whatsoever, barely on the edges over here and here. So it's going to take a little while to tidy up. But in the end, that'll be the job done properly, and we won't end up with this problem again. So it's going to take a bit of a scrub-a-dub-dub. Like I said, use a crosshatch pattern. So in other words, go this way and then back the other way. I'm just using a rough cut file at the moment just to get it down, and then I'll use a finer grade of file that should create a good surface. But for now we've got to hoe into it, get rid of some of this warpage. And as you're filing, make sure that your file is clean. You might need a wire brush to get rid of any metal shards that are in there, because that'll actually create big gouges in there if you're not doing it properly. So yeah, just take a little bit of time, give your file a good clean off in the direction of the cuts, of course, before anyone complains. Yes, that way. It's a double cut, so you've got to go both ways like that. Okay, back into it. You can clearly see the large amount of soot that has accumulated on the rocker cover. Now, you probably notice that it's mainly over this side over here rather than over the exhaust side. So it's the inlet side is where it came from, and that supports the evidence that we've found that flange leaking soot, it would get caught up under the engine cover and of course just accumulate under there and make a huge mess. And of course here's the engine cover, so you can see the soot has accumulated on the inlet side of things, and you can see it on the inlet manifold over there, not the exhaust side of things, and that's a bit of a direction of how we found the fault. So after much filing, as you can see, the surface is nice and flat. I've hit it with a rough cut file to start with, then a finer cut, and then finally a little bit of sandpaper with a block to make sure it's dead flat. So now I need to go on to my aluminium side, but need to be careful using a heavy grade file because it will leave massive gouges. So I'll just take it easy, but I don't think this is half as warped as the other side was, but happy with how the other side has come up. It's nice and flat, no issues there, so it should be good for the customer. Actually, I'm a bit surprised this aluminium housing isn't all that crash-hot either. You know, I've only touching over this side and over this side, so I've still got a ways to go, but yeah, hell, now's the time to do it rather than pulling it off again because it's blown another gasket, hey? Yeah, so I was quite surprised that the aluminium side of things was worse than I anticipated, but after filing and using the sandpaper, it's cleaned up nice. Sandpaper using a block, of course, to make sure that it's nice and level. I haven't squished this in the vise hard, guys, so don't panic. It's just being held just enough to make sure that it's being held, as opposed to squishing it up and making it worse. But yep, quite happy with those. So now I've got to put this back onto the vehicle, of course, with some Celastic and bolt it down carefully using perhaps even new bolts. I might use new bolts because of the fact that those bolts have probably been damaged by vibration through the threads. And then of course I've got to put the new EGR valve on and that pipe back into place. Now make sure, if you're going to use Celastic of any description, make sure it has sensor safe written on it. That's the important thing for later model vehicles. Don't use any old silicone, but make sure that it's sensor safe, okay? So I've just put that pipe on with the new gaskets and a bit of silicone from the head going through to the cooler or the heat exchanger. I've just used a bit of thread locker. I usually use Loctite, but that's all that was available. It's okay, nothing wrong with it. I'll put it on the inside of my thread, and I'm just about to put that on. Now because of the posi of the stud there, it's actually really hard to get to. So I've just stuck it on the end of my magnetic light with a wobbly joint thing, flexi, whatever you want to call it, and that works really, really well. So I'll just zoom in a fraction so you can see what I'm up to. So if we just stick it in there, hopefully we don't drop it. If I can get it started, and then I can finish it off with a socket then. So I'm just about to change over the EGR assembly. This is the new assembly. I've been assured that it's a genuine one, even though it didn't come from a dealer. But it came in the correct box, etc. But who knows nowadays. But this is the one that I'm going to fit. It's the correct one, etc. Everything lines up. So in this particular case, it was this little hole here that was bleeding out that smoke before. So obviously it had a vacuum leak in between the seal assembly there. So this is where it comes from the exhaust side of things and goes into the inlet. And obviously it must have had a leaking seal here, which came out this breather hole here. So time to just change it over. Of course, make sure I've got all new gaskets. The old ones were pretty knackered for schnookered, mate. So yeah, I've got new gaskets going as well. Okay, so job's done. Well, this side of it anyway. That's where the smoke was coming out, so that was our exhaust leak. And of course that's the explanation for all the soot that's across the top of the engine, as you can see there. So that gasket there has been replaced after filing all those flanges flat, which comes down to our heat exchanger. There's the other side of it, which I had to file that one flat as well, remember. Then across to the other side of the heat exchanger, replace that gasket up to here, which is our EGR valve. Now that's a new EGR valve. Remember, I had to replace that because it was leaking vacuum through where it goes between the exhaust and the intake side of things. So, well, that's that job done. Well, that side of the job done for this particular vehicle. So I'll put it back together, of course road test it, make sure that we don't have that noise anymore, and get the customer to keep an ear out for any strange noises. But I'm pretty happy with those results, and it'd be interesting too to see if they have any trouble with rough running when it's cold. Remember I mentioned that before, it was idling funny and surging and stuff when it was cold. I believe that would have been the vacuum leak coming out of the EGR valve. So now that we've got a new EGR valve, a brand newie, just like I bought one, hopefully that should sort that problem out. So what I'll do now is just start it up. Hopefully it doesn't go boo-boo-bang, and We'll just have a listen to it, but I'll put everything back together how it belongs. I thought I'd leave the engine cover off just for now. We'll see how she starts. So I'm going to take it out for a road test, of course, and while I'm out there I'm going to use some upper engine cleaner. This stuff is pretty good, and you know, obviously it makes a fair bit of smoke, so I'll do it out in the road test and just make sure that it clears all, you know, makes a start to get the carbon out, and hopefully that will aid some of the repairs that I've done as well. One of the customer complaints was running rough at idle, particularly when it's cold. Now, I've just run it for a very, very short period of time. It was probably, I don't know, 15 seconds, something like that. But they said when they drove down their driveway, they live on a farm, got a long driveway, it would surge and carry on. So let's see what it does as we go up the road. And don't forget to listen for that noise and see what it does. Hopefully that noise is out of here. So I can't hear any rough running or anything like that. Now listen, this is when it normally chirps. Flat knacker, second gear. Can't hear any chirping there. We'll just go up a few more hills, load up the engine and see what it sounds like. But that sounded pretty quiet then, didn't it? First gear, second gear, here we go. So that's second gear. Flat knacker, no sound. Ah, did you hear that? The sound of silence. Once again, flat knacker, under load. All we've got is plenty of power, which is awesome. Third gear, flat knacker. Either my hearing is playing up or there was no sound. I'll take it out the road now and use some of that inlet spray, and hopefully that'll help clear some of the carbon that it's accumulated over the years. So I've been on a road test and it's gone really, really well. Hasn't hesitated or played up, and that sound is, she's gone, mate, she's history. That's really, really good news, especially for the customer. So it goes to show you that you don't have to have expensive equipment to diagnose a fault. It was simple, just using a plain simple paint tin. Exhibit A, a simple paint tin. You know, the funny thing is that the guy that owns this Mitsubishi Triton is a painter. Well, I thought it was funny. So if you enjoyed this video, guys, I hope you did. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Give it a like. Feel free to comment down below. Don't forget about that notification bell. Dong, give it a good hit so that you don't miss out on any future videos. So until next time, this is MiracleMAX signing off. I'll catch you later.